I'm Hannah Banks, 38 years old, and for the last 16 years I've run a program I can't name in a speech. My family knew I was in the Navy. They thought I did communications work. For 15 of those years, my father's oldest friend, a Rear Admiral, looked past me at every family dinner like I wasn't worth the conversation. He was wrong, but I never corrected him. Until the morning of my brother's wedding, when a scanner at the gate did it for me. Have you ever been the invisible one at a table full of people who should have known better? If that's you, tell me about it in the comments. You're not alone. Before I tell you what happened that morning, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever stayed quiet in a room that didn't deserve your silence, hit subscribe. My father came home from deployments with a certain weight about him. Not heavy in a burdened way, but dense, like wood that has been soaked in ocean water for years. He would walk through the front door, and the air in the house would change. I was 6, then 8, then 10. And I spent those years watching him the way I later learned to watch everything. Quietly, from a useful angle, cataloging. The small things were always more informative than the big ones. The way he set down his bag, the way he looked at my mother before he looked at the room. These were the data points that told the real story of how a deployment had gone. Thomas Banks spent 26 years in the United States Navy, rising from ensign to captain. He was not famous within the service, but he was respected. He ran tight ships, his sailors trusted him, and he returned his family to Norfolk, Virginia, each time intact. My mother, Patricia, organized our lives around his deployments, the way you organize a house around a load-bearing wall. You build around it and never forget it is there. She was precise and patient and genuinely cheerful in a way that I only came to fully appreciate as an adult. When I understood how much effort genuine cheerfulness actually requires. I was born in February of 1988, the first of 2 children. My brother Marcus arrived 5 years later, in June of 1993. From a very early age, the trajectory was clear. Marcus wanted to follow my father, and my father wanted Marcus to follow him. It was not a decision so much as a gravity. The two of them moved toward each other the way similar things in the same orbit do. I could see it when Marcus was still small enough to fall asleep in Thomas's uniform jacket, wearing it like a tent, smiling in his sleep. I moved differently. What interested me was not what my father sailed through, but what he did not know was under the surface. I read about signals intelligence when I was 12. I found a book in a library about the history of military cryptography and read it twice. I was not trying to be different from Marcus. I was not trying to be anything. I was following my own interests the way children do before they learn to manage it for other people's comfort. On the kitchen table during my father's deployments, he sometimes left old navigation charts he no longer needed, paper, hand-corrected, coastlines, and depth markings. My mother used them as placemats and did not think much of it. I would study them after dinner, not because they were navigation charts, but because they were documents, and documents had layers, and I was interested in what was not immediately visible. I traced the depth soundings with my finger. I tried to imagine what the bottom looked like in the places the chart could only estimate. I was 10, and I was already thinking about the gap between what instruments recorded and what was actually there. My father noticed this the way he noticed most things about me. Once, briefly, and then moved on. He was not inattentive. He had a way of observing that was complete and then filed, and once something was filed, it was understood, and he moved forward. I was filed under. Bookish, thoughtful, not Marcus. He loved me in the way of a man who loves, without always knowing how to show it in the directions that count most. The retirement came in 2000. I was 12. Marcus was 7. The ceremony was held on a bright October afternoon on a pier at Naval Station Norfolk, and I sat in the second row and watched the handshakes and the presentations and the particular ceremony of an officer being released from active duty with honors. I noticed things in the margins. The 2 senior officers who had an entire conversation threw a shared look across the receiving line. The aide who placed himself at a precise angle to block a camera sight line, the way Thomas held his face during the final salute. He blinked twice. That was all. It was, I thought, the most honest moment of the entire afternoon. My father came home and settled into retirement with Patricia in the way that naval officers sometimes do. Purposefully, occupying himself with projects, still moving on a deployment schedule in his head, even when there was no deployment. He took up woodworking. He kept a calendar with his time accounted for in 30-minute blocks. Marcus spent the following years informing anyone who would listen that he intended to be an admiral. Thomas would smile at this with a fullness of satisfaction that he reserved for almost nothing else. I entered the Naval Academy at Annapolis in the summer of 2006. My father drove me himself 4 hours from Norfolk, talking most of the way about what I should expect and how the first year was the most demanding and how I should not be afraid to ask for help, which was advice he had never once taken in his own life and probably knew it. He was proud in the way that made him quiet toward the end of the drive. He shook my hand at the end of the day and said, "You will be good at this, Hannah." I did not tell him which part I intended to be good at. The academy was the first place I felt correctly calibrated. Not because it was easy. It was not. But because the work was serious, and the seriousness was expected, and I did not have to explain or soften or manage it. I studied cryptology and signals intelligence in my elective coursework, and found that the world I had been reading about in library books had structure and depth that the books could only approximate. I did well. I stayed late in the library by choice, which was not a common choice among my cohort. I made 2 close friends, both of whom went in completely different directions after graduation. I was content. I was occupied with the right things. I graduated in the spring of 2010, commissioned as an ensign in the United States Navy. My assignment was naval intelligence. When people at family events asked what I did, I said communications work, which was not entirely false and was much easier than explaining the rest. My father heard this and thought he understood. I let him. He repeated it to people. Hannah does communications work for the Navy, with a tone that was proud but slightly vague, the way people are proud of things they cannot fully picture. I did not correct this because correctness would have required me to say things I was not permitted to say, and also because it would have required me to occupy more space than I had decided at that point in my life was worth claiming. Gerald Whitmore entered our lives as a known quantity. He and my father had served in overlapping circles early in their careers, and the friendship had maintained itself in the low-maintenance way that old professional relationships do. Occasional dinners, holiday cards, a call when someone made Admiral. Whitmore made Admiral. My father had not. I do not believe Thomas minded. I believe Whitmore minded on Thomas's behalf, in a way that had the shape of sympathy, but was doing something else entirely underneath. The first time I met Whitmore in person was at a Sunday dinner in the spring of 2012. I was 24, a lieutenant junior grade, home for the weekend from a week I was not permitted to describe to anyone at that table. He arrived with a bottle of wine and an ease of presence that filled the room before he said a word. He had the handshake of a man who had given it thousands of times and had not stopped calibrating it. He shook my hand the way you shake the hand of someone whose name you have heard once and filed in a low-priority location. He asked Marcus, then 19, finishing his first year of college, about his plans. Marcus told him. Whitmore said, "Good man," with a conviction that carried the full weight of his rear admiral stars. Then he turned to me. "And what is it you do again?" he said. I told him. Naval intelligence. He nodded for approximately 3 seconds. Then his gaze drifted back to my father, and they resumed a conversation I was not part of. I ate my dinner and watched the street through the window and drove back to Washington the following morning. That was the first time. What I understood by the end of it was simple. In Gerald Whitmore's accounting, I was present, but I was not legible. And because I was not legible, I was easy to look past. I decided, in the car on the drive home, that I would not correct this. The work I was moving toward required a low profile. I would not chase visibility in rooms where visibility served nothing. I had enough clarity about who I was and what I was building toward. I did not need his attention to proceed. I was right about that. What I did not see clearly enough at 24 was the difference between choosing not to claim space and slowly letting others determine how much space I was entitled to. Those were different things. They can look identical for a very long time. The early years of the program were clarifying in ways I had not anticipated. I learned very quickly that the work required 2 separate selves operating simultaneously. The one who showed up at family dinners and said communications work with a pleasant expression, and the one who operated in rooms that did not appear on official floor plans. I had expected the separation to be difficult. It was, at first, and then it became simply a fact. The way carrying weight becomes simply a fact once the muscles have adjusted. I was good at both versions of myself. What I had not accounted for was the way the second version, practiced in silence and in classified contexts, could become the only version that felt real. And what happened, slowly, over years, was that I began to feel more legible to colleagues I had known for 6 months in classified environments than to family I had known for 30 years. I noted this without knowing what to do with it. I filed it and moved forward. The pattern established itself gradually, the way most patterns do. Not in a single defining moment, but in accumulation. Gerald Whitmore was not at every family gathering. He was at enough of them that I began to track his presence the way you track a variable in a dataset. Not obsessively, but carefully. Something was being measured, and after enough repetitions, I understood what. At the family reunion in the summer of 2019, he arrived in civilian clothes, a polo shirt, khakis, the ease of a man who carries his authority without needing to display it that day. I was 31. I was a lieutenant commander by then, running an operational program I could not describe to my family, and I had not slept more than 4 hours a night in the preceding week for reasons I could not give them. I was very good at appearing well-rested. I had practiced it until it required no effort. The reunion was at my father's brother's lake property in Virginia. It was warm, and there was food, and 3 of my cousins brought their children, and the afternoon had the loose, pleasant quality of a summer family gathering that has been organized well. I sat near the dock with a glass of water because I was too tired for wine, and I watched the lake, which did not require anything from me and was therefore restful. Across the water, there was a dock at the neighboring property where someone had left a rowboat tied at an angle, and I watched it tilt slightly in the breeze and thought about nothing at all. Whitmore arrived midway through the afternoon. He made his way through the cousins, nodded to my father, and found Marcus, 26 at the time, a newly commissioned ensign in the surface fleet, radiating the particular brightness of someone at the very beginning of a chosen path. "This one's going places," Whitmore said, loud enough for the surrounding area of lawn to hear. He glanced in my direction. "Good to see you again," he said, and continued his conversation with Marcus. I got myself a second glass of water and went back to watching the boat. The lake had a particular stillness that afternoon. No wind, the surface glassy enough to reflect the tree line with something close to accuracy. I thought about the week I had just come through. 7 days of sustained work, most of it done in rooms that did not exist as far as any public record was concerned. I thought about the people whose safety had depended, in those 7 days, on decisions made very quietly by a small number of people who would never be thanked for it. I thought about how strange it was to be sitting at a family reunion in Virginia on a Saturday afternoon, as though the week had been ordinary. It occurred to me, watching the lake, that the performance of ordinariness had become so complete that it was no longer entirely performance. I was ordinary in this context. I was also not ordinary. Both of those things were true. I had stopped needing them to reconcile. The Christmas dinner of 2022 was the one I think about most often. I was 34, a commander, 18 months into what would be the most demanding operational period of my career. The table was set nicely. Patricia had made a roast that she had been refining for 30 years and had perfected sometime around 2014. Whitmore and his wife Margaret arrived on time, and the evening had every element of a pleasant holiday dinner. Except that my place in it remained something I had to actively construct, the way you construct your place in any room where no one has thought to make space for you. Midway through the meal, Whitmore turned to me with the air of a man making an effort. "So what is it you actually do?" he said. "I have always wondered." I began to explain. Classified intelligence work. Operational program oversight, counterterrorism analysis. He nodded through the first 2 sentences. By the third, his eyes were drifting toward my father. I watched it happen in real time. The narrowing of attention, the exit being prepared, the decision to file this away, under-confirmed, and move on. "So a lot of briefings," he said. "Reports, that kind of thing." He turned back to Thomas. "How is Marcus's deployment going?" he said. I finished my wine. I did not speak for the rest of dinner, not because I was angry. I had moved past that particular variety of frustration some years earlier, sir. There was nothing in the room that required my voice in order to proceed. There were 7 people I was currently keeping alive through work he would never be briefed on. I decided not to mention it. Patricia offered me the last of the roast, and I accepted, which was the only transaction that seemed worth completing. I helped my mother clear the plates afterward, a thing I always did, a thing she always accepted without comment. A small ritual we had between us that required nothing from anyone else at the table. In the kitchen, with the sound of the men's voices carrying in from the other room, she patted my hand once. She did not say anything. She did not need to. My mother had a long, thorough understanding of what was and was not said at that table. And she had developed over the years an equivalent fluency in what she could offer me without entering territory that would make things complicated for Thomas. It was not enough. It was also something. I kissed her on the cheek and drove back to Washington that evening and was in the office by 7 the following morning, which was the correct thing to do and the easier thing to do, and I was aware that it was both. I told a colleague about it the following January. Lisa Park had been in the program for 4 years by then, a commander like me, and she had a quality I valued above most others. She listened without filling the silence with reassurance. She understood that sometimes what a person needed was not comfort, but clarity, and she was good at helping the clarity arrive without imposing it. I told her about Christmas, about the question that was not really a question, about the roast and the way Whitmore's eyes had left the conversation before I finished my first sentence. Lisa set down her coffee. "Does your father know your clearance level?" she asked. "He knows it is high," I said. "Does he know what that means?" I thought about it. "He knows it means I cannot tell him things." "Does he know it means the things you cannot tell him matter?" I did not answer immediately. "I think he assumed," I said finally. "I think he assumed they mattered, but not in a way that changed anything at dinner." Lisa nodded once and picked up her coffee. That was as much as we discussed it. It was the right amount, enough to name the thing, not enough to make it something I needed to carry differently. In December of 2025, Marcus called me on a Thursday evening. He had been with Elena Voss for 2 years. She was a pediatric nurse, warm and direct in the way that good nurses often are. And I had liked her immediately on both occasions I had met her. She asked questions and listened to the answers. She did not fill silence with noise. She was, in other words, someone I could sit comfortably with without having to perform anything. Marcus told me he had proposed. He had done it on the deck of his ship, which Elena initially called dramatic and then admitted she loved. He laughed when he told me, and the laugh was boyish and completely unguarded in a way I did not often hear from him. The wedding would be at the chapel on Naval Station Norfolk, January 18th. He wanted me there for all of it. I told him I would not miss it. Then he paused. "Whitmore is coming," he said. "Dad invited him." "That is fine," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "I figured you should know." "I appreciate it," I said. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and thought about the evening I had already composed in my head. The chapel, the ceremony, the dinner afterward, the particular labor of being present in a room where my presence was peripheral. I had done it before. I could do it one more time. I owed that to Marcus and Elena, who had nothing to do with Whitmore and everything to do with each other. Naval Station Norfolk, on a January morning, has the quality of a place that has been doing something serious for a very long time. The streets inside the fence are organized and quiet and purposeful, and the chapel where Marcus and Elena would be married sat near the center of it all. The kind of small Navy chapel that has hosted these ceremonies for decades without making a point of it. It does its work without commentary. I have always respected that in a structure. I arrived at the main gate at 9:45 in the morning. The rehearsal dinner had been the previous evening. The ceremony was at 11. I was early by design. I pulled into the VIP lane and had my access card out before I had fully come to a stop. This was automatic. 16 years of base entries. The motion happened before the thought. There was a black sedan ahead of me in the lane. Official plates. I did not immediately register whose it was. I was thinking about the small speech I was giving at the reception, running through the second paragraph in my head. The sedan's door opened, and Gerald Whitmore stepped out. He was in civilian clothes, a dark coat, dress trousers, the ease of a man who moves through the world without needing to announce himself. He said something to the gate guard, Senior Chief Petty Officer Reyes, and they exchanged a few words, the brief, comfortable exchange that happens when two people share a hierarchy and both know exactly where they stand in it. Reyes smiled. Whitmore smiled back. Then Whitmore turned and saw me in the car behind him. He studied me for a moment. No uniform, no visible insignia. My car was unremarkable. I could see him running the calculation. Wrong lane, wrong person, wrong place. He walked toward me. I rolled down my window. He put one hand on the roof of my car and tilted his head with a kind of easy authority. the gesture of a man accustomed to redirecting people without needing to raise his voice or explain himself. "I think she may be in the wrong lane," he said to Reyes first, then to me, slow and almost pleasant, the way a man talks to someone he is about to redirect. "You lost, young lady." The words were light, nearly friendly. The confidence in them was so complete that he had not even considered the possibility of being wrong. I looked at him for 1 second, then I got out of my car, walked to the access reader mounted at the gate booth, and slid my card through. The reader beeped once, then twice. The screen lit up. It read, Raven 6, Priority 1. Senior Chief Petty Officer Dana Reyes looked at the screen. I watched his posture change, a specific involuntary correction, the kind that happens when a person encounters something above their clearance tier. He straightened. He reached for the handset of the red phone mounted on the pillar beside the booth, and he reached for it the way you reach for something when you already know what it means that you are reaching for it. He spoke briefly, nodded, looked at me. "Ma'am," Reyes said, "command lane is open. I have notified the base. Please proceed." I took my card back. I returned to my car. I did not look at Whitmore. I pulled forward into the command lane. Marcus was parked just inside the gate, engine running, waiting to walk me to the chapel. He had a clear sight line to the VIP lane. He had seen all of it, the sedan, Whitmore at my window, the card going into the reader, the posture change, the red phone from start to finish. He was already out of his car when I pulled up beside him. He looked at me for a moment. "You okay?" he said. "I am fine," I said. "How is Elena?" He told me she was at the chapel with the efficient doing a final walkthrough. We walked together across the base in the January cold, our breath visible in the air, the chapel spire growing more distinct ahead of us. He did not bring up what he had just witnessed. Neither did I. We had always communicated like this, in the gaps as much as in the words. Some things did not need to be said in order to be understood between us. The ceremony was at 11. I took my seat in the family pew. Thomas had arrived before me. He was seated on my right. He had driven through the gate 10 minutes before my arrival, and from the expression on his face during the cocktail hour, composed on the surface but doing something careful underneath, I understood that he had heard from someone at the gate what my card had triggered, not the details, just the shape of it. He said nothing about it during the ceremony. He sat beside me and watched his son get married, and I sat beside him and watched my brother stand at the altar with the woman he had chosen. And for those 50 minutes, the gate was not the point of the morning. Marcus said his vows without looking down at a paper. Elena said hers with a clarity that told me she had meant them long before she said them out loud. When Marcus kissed his new wife and the room responded, I responded with it. I was glad, genuinely, cleanly glad, the kind of feeling that does not require management. In the vestibule afterward, Thomas pulled me aside. He was quieter than his usual quiet. "They told me what your card said," he said. I looked at him. He did not ask me what it meant. I think we both understood that the question had been available for a very long time, and that not asking it had been a choice, and that he was only now beginning to reckon with that. I straightened my jacket and picked up the small bouquet I was carrying as part of the wedding party. "The ceremony was beautiful," I said, and we went inside. The reception was held in the banquet hall adjacent to the chapel, a room used frequently for exactly this kind of occasion, with round tables and flowers, and a head table where Marcus and Elena sat looking slightly dazzled by the fact that it had worked, that all of it had come together, that they were now a thing they had only been planning to be until today. I found my seat at the family table. Patricia was to my left. She had cried twice during the ceremony and was now exercising the particular composure of a woman who has trained herself to recover quickly in social settings. She squeezed my hand when I sat down and held it a second longer than usual, which told me she knew something about the morning without knowing the details. Whitmore was at a table 2 rows back. A guest, not family. I was aware of him without looking directly at his table, peripheral and steady and unobtrusive, the way I was aware of most things. During cocktail hour, he crossed the room. He had a drink in his hand, and he moved without his usual social momentum, that effortless claiming of a space that I had observed in him since the first dinner. Something about the morning had recalibrated it. He was quieter. He found me near the windows. "Hannah," he said, "I wanted to say, I was not aware of what you do, of what that designation means." I waited. Your father does not talk about your work, he continued. I assumed a supporting capacity. Analysis. I should have. I know what you assumed, Gerald. He stopped. Had I known, he said, I would have engaged with you differently. Over the years. I looked at him. He was sincere. I believed he was sincere. Sincerity and understanding were not the same thing, but I noted it. I hope there are no hard feelings, he said. I thought about the right answer. What I actually felt was not hard feelings, so much as a long, accumulated tiredness at having to be this conversation at all. I thanked him for attending the wedding and excused myself. Thomas found me near the coat room before the toasts. He had the look of a man who had been working on a sentence for several hours and was not satisfied with any version of it. I have been proud of you, he said. I want you to know that. I know, Dad, I said. I am not sure I showed it the right way. I stood with that for a moment. It was not enough, not as a correction for 15 years of Sunday dinners where he had let Whitmore talk past me without intervening, not as a thing that could retroactively fill those evenings, but it was true, and it was more than I had expected this particular day to produce. I decided to hold both things at once. Elena found me before the toast and introduced herself as if we had not met before. A kindness, I thought, a way of starting fresh on the right terms. Marcus says you are the one who actually runs things, she said. I said Marcus was biased. He is also usually right, she said, about the things that matter. She asked what my work involved. I told her the honest version: classified intelligence program, counterterrorism, operational lead. She listened without asking me to translate, without the look people sometimes get when a conversation exceeds their framework. She said, "That sounds like important work." I said it was. She said, "Then I am glad someone is doing it." We talked for 10 minutes, and I found her to be exactly the person Marcus had described. She was the right person for my brother. The toasts were good. Thomas stood and said something about Marcus that was short and precise and exactly as proud as it needed to be. And Marcus's commanding officer said something shorter and funnier that earned a genuine laugh from the room, and Elena's father said something in which he tried very hard not to cry and did not entirely succeed, which was correct. That is what fathers are supposed to do at their daughters' weddings. Marcus toasted Elena in return and called her the most honest person he had ever met, which was specific enough that everyone understood he meant it. I sat at the family table and held my glass and watched my brother across the room. His face, his bearing, the way he sat beside Elena with the ease of someone who was exactly where he was supposed to be. He caught my eye once across the tables and held the look just a second longer than the occasion required. It said, "I know, I saw, I am glad you are here." I lifted my glass very slightly. He did the same. Before the reception dinner had been announced, Whitmore made one more approach. He found me at the edge of the main room near the bar cart, and this time he was direct. The social softening was gone. "Your father never told me what clearance level you were operating at," he said quietly. "I have been at functions with you for 15 years. Had I known..." "What would have been different?" I asked. He paused. "I would have engaged with you differently," he said. "You have said that." "I mean it." "I believe you," I said. He waited for more. I did not give it. "Hannah," he said, "I am asking you to understand that I was operating with incomplete information." "I know," I said. "Everyone was. The work required it." Then what was the rest of it about?" I said, not angrily, conversationally. "The clearance level was new information this morning. The dinners were not." He did not have an answer for that. He understood exactly what I had said. "I hope you can accept my apology," he said. "I appreciate the apology," I said. And I waited. He wanted me to complete the circuit, to offer reassurance, to say it was fine, to give him the resolution that would let the evening proceed without difficulty. I understood that impulse. I also understood that I was not going to give it. I thanked him for coming to Marcus's wedding and went back to my table. Thomas had watched from across the room. When I glanced at him, he was already looking away, the deliberate redirection of someone who has been watching and decided not to be. He turned back to Marcus's commanding officer and resumed their conversation. My father was not a man who interceded unless things had passed beyond managing. He had assessed this as something I could handle. He was correct. What he had not calculated was the cost of handling it alone, across 15 years, and what that cost had accumulated to. I stepped outside briefly near the end of cocktail hour. 3 minutes. January air, sharp enough to reset my thinking. The base was quiet beyond the immediate noise of the reception. In the distance, I could see lights along the flight line, steady and unhurried. I stood in the cold and thought about the 16 years of social wait. Not the work wait, which I had long since come to terms with, but the other kind, the accumulated labor of shrinking myself so that rooms would run more easily, of taking up exactly the amount of space I was offered, which was usually not much, and making it look comfortable, of performing smallness so convincingly that I had sometimes convinced myself. There was a difference between discretion and diminishment. Discretion was correct, not discussing classified work, not advertising my clearance level, not using rank to claim space where the work did not require it. That was right. What I had also been doing, separately and alongside it, was making myself invisible in rooms where I had every right to be visible. Absorbing being talked past because it was easier. Accommodating Whitmore's worldview because the cost of not accommodating it fell on my father, and I had loved my father enough to carry it for both of us. I was 38, I had run a program I could not name in a speech, that protected people who did not know they were being protected, that required me to be in places I could not describe to my family at dinners they were having without me. I had done this well enough to be promoted early, well enough to have my access flash, priority 1 on a screen that a rear admiral with 40 years of service had never seen lit that way before. I was done being a footnote at someone else's table. I went back inside and danced with my mother and watched my brother and his wife have their first dance and held on to the evening for what it was. A good day, the right people in the right room. I drove to my hotel at 11:30. The highway was nearly empty. I texted Marcus. "Congratulations, brother. She is wonderful." He texted back a heart. Then, I saw everything. "We will talk." I set my phone on the nightstand and slept for 7 hours without moving. It was the first full night of sleep I had had in 3 weeks. I was back at my desk by Tuesday. The program does not observe life events. It observes timelines, and the timeline required my attention and got it. I was in the building by 7:30 on the 21st of January, badge scanned, coffee in hand, same as any other Tuesday. The difference was internal and therefore invisible to everyone around me. I had never required interior changes to be visible. Whitmore called my direct line on Monday. I was in a briefing and did not pick up. I listened to the voicemail afterward. Formal, brief, prepared. He said he would like to have a conversation when I had time. He said he had spoken with some colleagues and gained a clearer picture. He said he hoped I was well. He had spoken with colleagues. I understood what this meant. He had spent the days after the wedding making careful inquiries in intelligence-adjacent circles, trying to understand the scope of what the scanner had shown him. Priority. One access is not public knowledge in its details, but its existence is known in certain circles, and its weight is legible to those who speak the language. Whatever he found confirmed what the scanner had already said. There was nothing new to add. I did not call him back. Thomas called 3 times over the following week. The first 2 went to voicemail, brief, careful, Thomas saying he hoped I had gotten home safely, Thomas saying they should find time to talk. On the 3rd call, a Friday evening, I answered. The conversation was halting. Thomas is not a man who processes emotion quickly or in front of people, and he was doing both at once. "Gerald mentioned he spoke with you at the reception," he said. "We spoke briefly," I said. "He said you were composed." I was. A pause. "He seemed affected," Thomas said. "By the morning." "I imagine," I said. Another pause. "Hannah? Dad?" I said. "It is okay." I said it, not because it was entirely okay, but because this Friday was not the right conversation for all of it. We would need to approach it in pieces. He understood. He said goodbye and meant something larger by it. I told Lisa about the gate the following Wednesday over coffee in the break room. I described the exchange at the VIP lane, the card, the screen, Rhea's reaching for the red phone. Whitmore's expression, which I described as recalibrated. She listened without interrupting. "Did you say anything to him after the scanner?" she asked. "Not at the gate." "At the reception." "Briefly." "What did he want?" "Absolution," I said. "And?" I told him I appreciated his apology. She nodded once and picked up her coffee. That was as much as we discussed it. It was always the right amount with Lisa. That afternoon I had 3 back-to-back briefings, All of them demanding, all of them requiring exactly the kind of focused attention that left no room for anything else. I was grateful for this. The work was, among its other qualities, the most reliable environment I knew. In a room full of classified intelligence with 4 other people whose job it was to be precise, I did not need to manage how I was perceived. I was perceived correctly because the work made correct perception unavoidable. The reports said what the reports said. My analysis was either accurate or it was not. My clearance level was either sufficient for the conversation or it was not. There was no ambiguity of the Whitmore variety. The ambient, comfortable assumption that certain people were more worth paying attention to than others, invisible and unchallenged because no one had thought to challenge it. In that sense, the office was a more honest room than any family dinner I had attended in 15 years. I'd never fully articulated this to myself before. I articulated it now in the car on the way home and found that naming it made the weight of the week lighter in a specific way. Approximately 10 days later, I heard through a colleague, 2 degrees of separation, the way information moves in classified environments, that Whitmore had been making inquiries in his circles. Not about the program itself, which he would never be briefed on, but about Priority 1 designation and the structures that create it. Whatever he found told him what the scanner had already said. I did not feel triumph. It was more like watching a measurement become accurate. The measurement had always been true. Now it was displayed. In the last week of January, I went for a run after work along the canal in the dark and thought about my brother and his wife in the first days of their marriage, and felt genuine gladness for them, clean and uncomplicated, and I held that all the way home. Marcus called on a Tuesday morning, the 3rd of February. He was in the Azores. Elena had wanted somewhere she had never been, and he had wanted good seafood. Both had been satisfied. He told me about a whale. He and Elena had been on a small boat. A whale-watching excursion he had agreed to because she wanted it and privately expected to find dull. A fin whale had surfaced alongside the boat, close enough that Elena grabbed his arm and he stood very still and looked at it for as long as it allowed. He told me this with care, the way Marcus tells things that have genuinely moved him. Without embellishment, without commentary, just the facts placed in front of you with respect. Then he got quiet. "I was parked right inside that gate, Rach," he said. "I saw everything." "I know," I said. "The whole thing," he said. "Whitmore at your window, the card, the guard reaching for the phone." "I know." "He had no idea who you were." "No," I said. "He did not." I am sorry I could not say more right then. "You did not need to say anything," I told him. "You were there. That was enough." He nodded, working through it the way Marcus worked through everything. Carefully and then completely. "I have been putting it together over the years," he said. "The clearances, the disappearances, the way certain people in Washington look at you when you walk into a room. I have been paying attention. I do not need the details. I just need you to know I have been watching." I was quiet for a moment. "I know you are the serious one," he said. "I have always known. I should have said it louder in rooms where it mattered." There was a particular texture to that sentence. I sat with it. "Since you were 10, maybe," he said. "You spread Dad's old charts on the kitchen floor. Remember?" I did. "I thought, she's going to know something the rest of us do not," he said. I was right. Elena appeared at his shoulder. "He talks about you constantly," she said. "Just so you know." "Good things, I hoped." "He says you are the reason he stayed in the Navy," she said. "That you made it look worth it." I did not have an immediate answer. It was the most surprising thing anyone had said to me in recent memory. "I am glad he stayed," I said. "And I am glad he found you." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. The winter light moved across the floor. I thought about my brother watching me since we were children, not with concern, but with recognition. And I thought about the fact that he had known all along. He had never made a performance of knowing. That was perhaps the most Marcus thing possible. That evening I wrote my father an email. The first version was too long, the second was 5 sentences. It said, "I do not need you to apologize for Gerald. He is his own person. What I do wish is that you had told him, at some point over the years, that you were proud of me. Not for my clearance level, just for who I turned out to be. I signed it R and sent it before I could revise it further. Then I sat with the sent message for a moment and felt, I think for the first time, that I had said a true thing to my father at exactly the right volume. I had spent 38 years adjusting the volume downward in his presence, not because he had asked me to, but because I had understood, somewhere early, that the full version of myself was a register he did not quite know how to respond to, and I had loved him enough to make it easier. Sending that email was the first time I had deliberately not adjusted. 5 sentences, true ones, sent. I made a cup of tea and went to bed at a reasonable hour and did not replay the email in my head. That, I thought, was its own kind of progress. March arrived without ceremony. The days got longer. I was deep into a new assignment and moved through the days with the specific focus that serious work provides. Each hour purposeful, the kind of absorption that fills the available space cleanly and leaves nothing extraneous behind. I was in early and out late, and the work was the right kind of demanding. On the 10th of March, my father sent me an email. Thomas Banks had never communicated a significant thing by email. He preferred the phone, in person, occasionally a handwritten note. An email was unusual enough that I read it twice before I allowed myself to process it. It was 4 paragraphs. He wrote that he had been thinking about what I said since January, and had not responded sooner because he wanted to say something true rather than something quick. He wrote that he had not known how to talk about my work because he did not understand it, and that he had convinced himself, over the years, that understanding was a prerequisite for acknowledgement. He wrote, I think I was wrong about that. He wrote that a father should not need a clearance briefing to recognize that his daughter has built something worth naming. He wrote that he had failed to say what he should have said at dozens of dinners and that I was right to name it. And then, at the end of the 4th paragraph, you turned out better than I deserved. He did not mention Whitmore at all. Not a single sentence about him, not even a reference to the gate. This was a choice, and I understood it as one. Thomas had decided that the accounting between him and me was a separate matter from the accounting between him and his old friend, and that conflating them would have been a way of avoiding both. I respected this, even if it cost him something to separate them. Possibly because it cost him something to separate them. I sat with the email on my screen for 10 minutes. I read it a 3rd time and paid particular attention to the sentence about understanding not being a prerequisite for acknowledgement, because it was the most precise thing he had ever said to me in writing, and I wanted to be sure I had received it correctly. Then I sent a short reply. Thank you, Dad. This helps. Whitmore's note arrived the same week through inter-office channels. A handwritten card forwarded by a colleague. It was brief and stiff, the kind of document that has been drafted and redrafted until all the excess is removed, leaving something that was not quite an apology and not quite a letter, but occupied the space between. He wrote that he had underestimated me. He wrote that the source of this was his own assumptions about which kinds of work deserved his attention. He wrote that he should have asked better questions. He signed it, Rear Admiral G.K. Whitmore, U.S.N. I read it once. I placed it in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I did not respond. He had underestimated me. He had put it in writing. That should have felt like enough, and mostly it did. What it also felt like was what it was: paperwork, the formal closing of an account that had been open too long. The documentation was for him, not for me. I already knew what I knew. On a Thursday evening in the middle of the month, I was working late, close to 9, reviewing a report that required careful reading and would not yield to rushing. The building was quiet. The lights in the corridor were on their overnight setting. At some point, I became aware that I was not tired. Not physically. I was, reasonably. I meant the other kind, the bone-deep exhaustion I had learned to call a normal part of family events. The specific fatigue of preparing in advance to walk into a room where I needed to manage myself carefully, to be present without being too present, to be competent without making it uncomfortable, to exist without requiring anyone to update their assumptions. The exhaustion of performing smallness so consistently that it had become automatic. That tiredness was gone. I sat in my office at 9 in the evening and realized it was absent, the way you realize a background noise has stopped. Suddenly the silence is louder than the sound had been. I had been carrying it for so long that I had counted it as ambient, as the natural texture of my family life. It was not ambient, it was weight. It had specific dimensions, and I had simply stopped counting them, and now they were lifted, and I could feel the difference in the air. On the way out that evening, I passed a junior analyst, A woman in her mid-20s, moving quickly with a laptop bag over one shoulder and a folder under her arm, clearly later than she wanted to be. I held the door at the bottom of the stairwell. She thanked me quickly and kept moving. I watched her go for a moment. She was where I had been at 25, early in a career that required her to be invisible, in ways that had nothing to do with her capacity, building towards something she could not yet fully name, doing work that mattered in rooms where the mattering was classified. She would have her own gate. I hoped someone would be parked just inside it, waiting. I drove home through the March dark. The radio played something, and I turned it down until it was barely audible and drove the rest of the way in near silence. I thought about dinner. I thought about what was in my refrigerator and whether there was enough for what I wanted. I thought about the analyst in the corridor and whether she had eaten yet and whether the folder she was carrying was going to resolve the way she needed it to. I thought about the small things. The cup of tea I would make when I got home, the book I had left face down on the kitchen table 3 nights ago and kept meaning to return to. I did not think about the gate, or the scanner, or Gerald Whitmore, or any of it. For the first time since January, none of it occupied the available space. The space had been claimed, quietly, by things that asked nothing from it. This was, I understood, exactly what peace looked like. In the last week of April, Marcus and Elena came to Washington. His ship was in port for a maintenance cycle, the kind of scheduled pause that gives surface fleet officers an unexpected pocket of ordinary life. And they had taken 4 days. They were staying in a hotel 2 miles from my apartment. On Saturday morning, they appeared at my door at 9 o'clock with a box of pastries tied with string and 2 extra coffees. I had not known they were coming until Marcus texted at 8:45. In the lobby. Be up in 10. I had just enough time to make a pot of coffee before they knocked. Elena had chosen the pastries from a bakery on their walk over. An almond croissant, something with apricot, 2 plain ones, and one thing neither of them could identify that turned out to be excellent. Marcus made fun of her for the string on the box. It is important, she said. What does the string accomplish? He said. It makes it feel considered, she said. The pastries are the consideration, he said. The string confirms it, she said. I poured the coffee and we took everything out to the balcony. It was barely large enough for 3 chairs and a small table, which Marcus noted and I agreed with. He put his feet on the lower railing and Elena told him to put them down, and he did, briefly and then slowly put them back up. The April light was warm and the street below was moving in its unhurried Saturday way. A woman walking a dog, 2 men with coffee, a cyclist going very fast, and then suddenly very slow for no visible reason. I had not had people on this balcony before. 4 years in the apartment, and it had always been just me and the street and whatever I was reading. It occurred to me, sitting there with my brother and his wife and 4 different pastries, that I had not known I was missing this. I had been sufficient on my own. Sufficient and complete were not the same thing, and the difference was something I was only beginning to allow myself to understand. I thought about the years in this apartment, the books read alone on the couch, the dinners made for one, the quiet that I had called chosen, and that was chosen, mostly, but was also simply what was available. I had told myself that solitude was the appropriate shape of the life I was living. In certain ways it was. In other ways, I had been accepting a smaller life than I was capable of, and calling the acceptance wisdom. That morning, with Marcus's feet on the railing and Elena unwrapping the pastry with the string, felt like the beginning of a different accounting. Marcus told a story about a junior officer on his ship who had supplemented prepared materials for a routine intelligence briefing with additional analysis assembled from, as Marcus described it, confidence rather than sources. The briefing went smoothly until the intelligence officer asked one follow-up question. The junior officer paused, then he said, with complete composure, I will have to check my notes. There were no notes. What happened? I asked. Nothing dramatic, Marcus said. He stood there for about 4 seconds and said I will follow up in writing, and then the briefing ended. And the follow-up? A very thorough email that evening, Marcus said. Sound analysis. Good work. Elena was laughing. I was laughing. Marcus extended the story longer than strictly necessary, adding details about the 4-second pause that were either accurate or invented, and it did not matter which. It was a good morning. At some point in the quiet between stories, while Elena was inside refilling her coffee and Marcus was looking at his phone, I found my mind going briefly to January, to the gate, to the moment Whitmore went quiet. I had expected, if anything, to feel a distance from it by now. The memory bleached into something neutral. What I found instead was something warmer. Not satisfaction, not triumph. Something more like recognition. The feeling of a thing having been correctly named. He had stood at my car window and seen someone who did not belong in the lane she was in. He had seen it so completely, so automatically, that he had not needed to deliberate. And then the scanner had shown him something his own certainty had made impossible to predict, and in the second between the beep and the red phone I had watched him update. The update did not erase 20 years. But it was real, and it was legible, and it was done in front of my brother, who was parked 20 feet away, watching every second. The scanner did not give me anything I did not already have. It just stopped me from pretending otherwise. That was the whole story. I sat with this for a moment. The clean, complete quality of it. Not resolution in the television sense, not an apology accepted and a wrong made right. Something smaller and more honest than that. A scanner had read a card. A man had updated. My brother had been watching. My father had written a sentence that told me he understood more than I had let myself hope he did. None of it had fixed the dinners, or the reunions, or the 15 years of being talked past at tables where I had earned a seat. But it had named those things, and naming them had made them less expensive. I was no longer paying interest on something I had never agreed to borrow. Elena came back with her coffee and sat down and told us about a patient from the previous week. A 7-year-old who had arrived at the hospital with great drama and departed 2 days later with strong opinions about the quality of the gelatin. She told the story with the ease of someone who has spent years finding the right things to carry from hard days and setting the rest down. Marcus listened to her the way people listen when they have made a genuinely good decision and know it. They stayed until almost noon. When they left, Marcus hugged me at the door for a long time. Not our usual brief grip, which we had been exchanging since he was 15, and decided he was too old for anything more, but a real one. The kind that says, I know. I am glad you are here. I am glad we are this. We are doing this again in May, he said. I will have pastries, I said. I accept that responsibility, Elena said. I closed the door. The apartment was quiet. The coffee cups were still on the balcony table. I went back out and sat in the chair Marcus had occupied and looked at the street, which was slightly warmer now that the morning had advanced. I thought about the balcony and the morning and the string on the pastry box and what it meant to have a smaller and truer circle of people. I thought about how long I had been looking for recognition in rooms that were not going to give it, and how I had not noticed I was doing this until I stopped. The scanner had not given me anything. The scanner had simply made the room catch up. Below on the street, a very small dog was walking with enormous dignity beside an owner who matched its energy exactly. I watched them until they disappeared around the corner. Then I went inside and picked up my book. Outside, the street continued its unhurried Saturday business. I did not watch it anymore. There was nothing out there that required my attention, and this was finally a fine way to spend an afternoon. If you've ever walked into a family gathering and felt like the room had already decided who you were before you sat down, I understand that. I did it for 15 years. I told myself it was discretion. Some of it was just accommodation, dressed up in more respectable language. What I've come to understand is that the people who actually see you, not your clearance level, not what a scanner says, just you, those people were always worth more than the whole crowded table of people who weren't paying attention. If this story reached something in you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Tell me about the room where you finally stopped performing smallness. Tell me about the person who was parked inside the gate waiting. And if you're here for the first time, hit subscribe.